Welcome to our posts. Today we will see stories of r/malicious compliance. If my work is that bad, then it would be better for everyone if I quit. My last job was okay, but not fantastic. We were always short-staffed, and as a result, we had to make up any time lost due to absence or illness. But the real trial was our boss, who was one of those seagull bosses, always wanting drastic changes to everything, no matter how unnecessary they were or how much harder it would make our work. He also constantly threatened to fire people. I'd had a F up the previous year. I admit it was on me, and my supervisor, a very good one, helped me to sort it out and make sure it didn't happen again. But we had received some customer complaints and I was paranoid about getting more, and oh boy did the boss like to hold that over my head. Anyway, more than a year later, and I apply on a whim to a very well-regarded company in my town. To my surprise, I get the position. It's much better run and organized, so it's a great deal. But I do feel a bit bad for my old work since we're about to hit a very busy season. At least until my boss called and said he'd received a complaint about me and I needed to shape up or I'd be fired. I was really upset, but then, wait a minute, it's been the dead season just now. I haven't done anything to get complaints. I messaged my supervisor and yep, no complaints since the last year. Boss was either making it up or pretending the complaints were from this year. So I decided this was the perfect opportunity. I messaged my boss and told him that since there were so many complaints and I wasn't getting any better, it would be best for me to step down from my role as I obviously could not do it. Immediate backpedal on his part. Suddenly the complaints didn't mean anything. I could get a raise, sick leave, anything. Since it wouldn't be the first time he'd promised us the moon and delivered a bowl of dirt, I didn't budge. He'd been telling me all year that I was only verge of being fired and wasn't good enough for my role, so it was best I go. He hung up and got the poor supervisor to call instead, and she twigged pretty quickly when I mentioned where I'd be working now, and all but said that if she got the chance she'd jump ship for that too. Anyway, been at my new work for 2 years now and it's great, no regrets. Next story. Charging me for something extra that never existed? Fine, I'll pretend like it did. I was using a storage company to keep my stuff over the summer, and they already fudged up the first part of the delivery, so I wasn't having high hopes for the time when I was supposed to get my stuff back. I had sent 7 boxes to the company but received a quote for 8 boxes instead, and the surplus they charged on it was quite a lot. I wrote to them asking why there's this extra box, and they never replied to me to say that they'd look into it or to cancel the charges for the 8th box that didn't exist. I called them every week and the line was bogged up every time, and emailed them near every day because the situation was just so stressful. They kept saying the extra charge was because I stored an extra box and they can't do anything about it, despite me being explicitly clear in all my correspondence that there was no 8th box. Now that they've asked for confirmation that I received all my boxes, I said that after 2 months, I still haven't received the final box. I got my delivery charges refunded as a goodwill gesture, not that I would go back to them ever, but the satisfaction now lies in the idea they are tramping around the warehouse trying to find a box that doesn't exist. If they still haven't found the non-existent box by month 3, I might just as well demand reimbursement for no loss on my part, aside from the extreme annoyance I suffered throughout this unpleasant ordeal. Next story. Oh, my paper isn't long enough? So in my junior year, I was taking an art history class on medieval art and architecture. Partway through the course, the professor assigned a paper and the instructions were that the paper length was to be 5 to 9 pages. I wrote my paper and it ended up being 5 pages. I said everything I felt was necessary to say in that amount of pages. When I got the paper back, I received an A-. Now, I'm not usually the type to complain about an A-, but in this case I knew I wrote a strong paper. I was an art history major and at this point was 3 years into my program, so I had a buttload of art history classes under my belt and I knew when I produced a good art history paper. So I really wanted to hear why I got the minus instead of a straight A. I went to the professor's office hours to ask why he graded it as such. Yes, he was quite amused someone was complaining about an A-. I didn't give AF. I wanted to know why he took off points and what he thought could have been improved. He hemmed and hawed for a few minutes, because there wasn't anything wrong with my paper, and finally he said, well, it could have been longer. I said, the prompt said 5 to 9 pages and I was within that range. He replied, it could have been longer. Okay, fine. Next paper that came around was the term research paper, and this time, the prompt said at least 15 pages. QMC. I worked my butt off writing this research paper. And out of pure spite, I made this dude read no less than 29 pages about some stupid medieval church. Now I had written papers this long before, and a year later when I wrote my honors thesis it was nearly 4 times that length, but for this particular topic, I was really stretching it. The verbosity was a bit ridiculous. A week or two later, he returned the paper. A+ grade. He handed it to me and said with a genuine smile, "It was great, I loved it. You should submit it for publication to XYZ History Journal." I begrudgingly submitted my maliciously compliant paper to the journal and it was accepted and published. Admittedly, I was probably the one that suffered the most from my own MC, but I didn't care and I'd do it again. Next story. No OT, but you won't swap me to day shift? Okay, boss. My work, aviation, was on a no OT at all rut for a while in 2021. No biggie to most of us, but the bosses were strict with every single minute because the higher-ups were watching the time charging as well to make sure no OT was being clocked. I got a new job within my company that was requiring me to move. I was working second shift, 1400-2300 Monday to Friday, at the time, so when I get to work and answer all the HR emails, I would be behind on the checklist I'd have to complete prior to moving. So I did the logical thing and emailed my then supervisor and asked to be transferred to day shift so I could be in the building during the daytime to talk to HR, otherwise I was going to miss my transfer date. My supervisor emails me back and says, "You have a company laptop now, answer those emails from your house. I'm not swapping you to day shift." I responded okay. So I began my day at 0900 so I could email and Teams chat with various HR reps during the day and then go to work in the afternoon. I logged every minute, and being that I had a company laptop, I know they can see my login activity, so I would have backup if they tried to claim I was stealing time. Fast forward a week and the site manager, supervisor's boss, pulls me into his office and wants to know why I have almost 20 hours of OT for the previous week when we aren't allowed any OT. I explained to him I was given permission from the supervisor. Site manager calls the supervisor in. Supervisor says he gave no such permission. I tell them both about the email response, offer to send it to them and print it up should they need. My supervisor got as red as fire truck. Site manager said your OT is approved and kicked me out of the office, asking me to close the door as I left. I received a text message 2 hours later informing me I was to start day shift immediately. Next story. Cameras have to be on, and no matter what. Fine by me, don't mind the pump. I am a project manager and data scientist. I manage lots of different public health related projects. There is one project in particular that includes a really demanding team from a federal government department. I recently returned back to work from maternity leave. I work in my office 3 days a week. On those days, I have to pump breast milk at regular intervals for my baby. Luckily, I have my own private office and can usually just keep on working, emails, reports, etc., while I pump. I have a hands-free, wearable pump which is convenient, but still definitely obvious if I am wearing it. It pokes out about my shirt and is not exactly silent. Recently we have a Zoom call scheduled during one of the times I needed to pump. Instead of missing the meeting, I figured I would just keep my camera off so I could wear my pump and still participate and listen. Heck, I was even in my office and not working from home. I felt like I was being a pretty committed employee. Meeting starts, a few people have their cameras off. The lead makes the announcement. I just want to remind everyone that our expectation is that you will have your cameras on because this is not a virtual meeting, it is a simulated in-person meeting, whatever that means. I sent a quick private message to explain I was paying attention, but pumping, no response to me, just instead, again, the expectation is that all cameras will be on. So fine. I turn my camera on for this meeting of about 20 people. The camera isn't aimed at my chest, but certainly the top of my pump is clearly visible. I unmuted myself, so you could also clearly hear the pump, and just said, "Thank you for your patience, I was adjusting my breast pump." The meeting continued awkwardly, with several other team managers letting me know privately it was fine to turn my camera off, but at that point, there really was no point in turning it off. At the most recent meeting, the announcement was, "Please turn on your cameras if you are comfortable doing so." I hope you guys like this video. If you did, make sure like, comment, share and subscribe the channel or posts.